All right. Welcome back to another episode of ATtalks. We have the Brain Trust back again. Tony, Nikki, Alex, aka Alejandra, and capital A. And maybe Big Ed will join us. But we're just doing a little series here for our athletic training students and early career athletic trainers, just making a guide. This is episode 2. So we're going to assume that we graduated, we have our plan, we have our path, we put out some job applications, and now someone hopefully is calling us. So what are the things that we want to know during the interview process before we take a job?
Good question. Me from a personal standpoint, but also thinking it's important from a professional. When you do go on those interviews, I think the most important thing, and I'm sure people have heard this before, but you definitely want to take your time interviewing the company or the institution just as much as they're interviewing you. So, when you're talking about things you want to know, just to kind of get the conversation started, for me, I want to know the team dynamic. I kind of want to know the atmosphere. I want to know the culture. I want to know how they interact with one another, how they communicate. If I can grasp as much information as possible when I come to an interview, I really want to learn of the team dynamic.
Branching off of that, I was going to say is going to be your reporting structure. I think is going to be the hugest thing for me is who do you directly report to? Who do you indirectly report to? So in good times and bad times, you need to know what do you, I kind of call it a decision tree. I honestly picked it up from a book I ran somewhere along the way, but like what kind of decisions are you allowed to make independently when you're in your role? What kind of decisions do you need approval from your higher up to make? And kind of getting an idea of really what the reporting structure is and if you're comfortable with that before taking that job on.
I think to add to that is knowing who your stakeholders are. Right, from a secondary school standpoint, we know we have the parents and the coaches, but working contracted and then also as a teacher, I have a lot of different people in play. So, like Nikki said, decision tree, who do you report to, but also who are your advocators and who will you be dealing with on the daily, who can assist you. And that's why, I think what Tony says is very important, asking those type of questions so that those type of situations that if this were to happen, then that you would have this team behind you or this team involved with you in that situation. And I think in addition to asking questions, I would find out like what the question I like to ask if I'm interviewing someone or if I'm being interviewed is what are you missing that I can add or something along those lines, right? Because if I'm at a high school that is doing really bad with return to play, so then I know I'm going probably to have to re-up my rehab skills. Like, do I know that kind of stuff? So asking those type of questions as well. And then resources and budget, and also asking those kinds of questions that you kind of know what you're walking into. I think that's also really important.
I agree, and I think one of the things that'll make this part of the job search successful is I like to think about preparing ahead of time. Asking questions in an interview it's not just for I ask questions because I'm supposed to, or that's what everybody says you should do. It's definitely for gathering information. It's definitely for double checking things that you've researched the organization or the company or the school or whatever. It's for as much for you as it is for them. One of the questions I like to ask of a potential manager or a potential employer, potential supervisor is, what does a good employee look like or act like? Or, what are you, my manager, my potential manager, expecting of me? Because everybody has a different management style, or every boss or employer has a different style of working with their people in their group. So it could be very hands-off. They want to be involved in all of your decisions. So I think knowing what their style is, their communication style, their personality, what they expect of you is a good, legitimate question to ask.
Yeah. In regards to continue to try to figure out more, if they don't have it on their website, if it's not found, one of the things I think is really important, and this is just kind of adding on to what everybody has said already, but knowing what the company or institution's vision is for sports medicine, what their mission is for sports medicine, because you really want to know, does your passion, does your vision line up? Because I see a lot of athletic trainers, they fall into, they accept the job and they realize, man, this school doesn't have the same vision that I have. You know, they're not supporting me like I thought they should, or they're not help advocating for what I thought they should be. Well, if you never knew what their vision was, like if their vision is, we just need somebody to cover practices and games, right? If that's their vision, if that's their mission, is just to make sure that, you know, we're taking care of liability, and, you know, if that's it, then that you need to be able to take that in and decide, is this something that I want to partake in? You know, if your vision is higher than that, if you have a passion to do more, then you might really want to think about exploring other options. So again, just to kind of conclude, really take the time, and even if you read upon their vision and mission, really take the time to ask for them to elaborate and have a dialogue conversation about that, to make sure that you actually are on one accord if you were offered that position.
To branch off that, I would say look at the evaluative process. Like, how are you going to be evaluated in your job? And I think that goes back to the mission and vision, right? If I care a lot about patient outcomes, but my employer doesn't, we hope that's not true, but they don't necessarily value that in the same way, your evaluation may not be reflective of that, right? So you want to know what the criteria is at the end of the year for renewing your contract or for promoting you, depending on what type of job setting you're in, and make sure that that evaluative criteria lines up with what you're doing before you take that job, right? Because if I'm very interested and I feel like I'm really good at establishing patient outcomes and getting all these great things, that's great. But if I'm not getting evaluated on that, and then my evaluation doesn't reflect that, then that leaves a missed opportunity for promotion or for renewal of contracts and et cetera. So know what the criteria is for you being evaluated for keeping your job or progressing in your job. Especially, you're at entry level now, but hopefully someday you won't be. So you do want to look towards the future as getting promoted or making more value to your position.
I think one of the challenging or intimidating parts of the interview process is, and maybe you know, everybody else can kind of help me with this answer, but how many jobs have you interviewed for in your life? We all have a job or maybe two jobs that we're doing right now, but like, how many interviews have you guys sat through in relation to the one or two jobs you have? It's probably been a lot, right?
So, yeah, I mean, for me, yeah. And then obviously on the other end, being a part of the hiring committee, I've also sat in and helped interview a lot of candidates as well.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's going to be, and that's kind of the truth of any job market. There's going to be a lot more interviews and probably a few more no's than there are yeses. So just to kind of, you know, prepare yourself for that, it's all practice, and you just keep going back and you keep practicing and practicing and trying again.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think something else to realize as a new grad is that not everybody will call you back if you don't get the job. So being prepared to not hear from everybody and knowing that some employers do that, it's sometimes part of policy. So just realizing that if you don't get a call back, it's not because they're just being rude or anything, that it's just sometimes that's a company's policy that they just won't contact you if you don't get the job, and that's okay. So I think realizing that, and then, you know, what I hate to say replay, because that's the kind of mentality I have, like, what could I have done better? But I like to, especially when you're asking the questions, their responses, I like to think like, how could I have asked that question differently? Because it also depends on how you ask the question it's the type of answer that you're going to receive back. So making sure it's not like a yes or no answer, but a question that creates dialogue so that you can get as much information out of them as possible. So maybe if you asked a yes or no question in one interview, then you realize the next interview, I can word it a little differently so that I can get more information and more communication out of the conversation.
I think just
That being said, I would just say to be your true self. I'm sorry. I think a lot of people sometimes try to modify their answers to give the employer what they're looking for, but in reality, you know, it's your job and you're going to spend a lot of time there. So I would just say be honest in your answers. Obviously, there's different ways to ask questions or to answer questions, but still don't stray away from your mission, your vision, and your values just to meet that of what you feel may be what the employer wants.
And were you about to go in? Were you about to go ahead?
That's all right. I was going to touch back on one of the things that Alex said. That yeah, you won't hear back from some people, and that's okay, and it happens. But you're also well within your right to follow up, you know, within a reasonable amount of time, and be like, hey, I interviewed for this job. I'd like to inquire about the status of my application. You know, you can do it professionally and politely. And if they say, you know, we've decided to go with another candidate, some people will ask, was there a part of my interview that I could have improved upon? You know, that you're looking to learn from this experience and seek to be better. You're not just there for like the details on, well, why didn't you like me? It's more, how can I improve upon this? And you can ask that if you get turned down for a job. They may or may not give you any concrete suggestions, and that's okay. But that's just another way to turn the interview process into a learning process for you.
And just to kind of add on what Nikki was talking about in regards, obviously being yourself and answering truthfully to who you are. But I wanted to try to at least provide a tip on how to still be yourself, but still cater to the company that you may be, you know, applying to. So you're still being truthful to yourself, but it's important for you to research the company. You know, if there's information available on, you know, what skill sets they use, whether they're a big functional movement screening company, whether they use HydroWorks or they're a big manual therapy, you know, as you take the time to research, then you can kind of evaluate yourself and see what is truthful about you that lines up with what they're looking for. So you're still answering in truth, but you're articulating how your experience throughout your career puts you in a position to be of value to them, or to continue to cater to what they like to do. So again, just a little tip to kind of add to what Nikki was saying, stay truthful, but you can still take the time to figure out what you have, what skills, what expertise, what proficiencies you have that will line and that will line up their vision with their practice, with their expectations, and you give you an opportunity to articulate that. And I think that will really, you know, help you all out.
I think that's really important, and even more important so for new grads of color, especially, you know, depending on the institution that you're going to. Definitely research the institution, and everyone should feel comfortable going into a job interview and knowing that you can be supported. So I think that's also very important when you're doing the research. Go to their website, look at pictures, look at their boards, if they have committees and all of that. I think that's also very important, because if you really like this job and you plan on being there for a while, then, and if there's not that much diversity or inclusivity, then what can you do to help potentially change that? And then that can also be a potential question is, you know, how open are you to X, Y, and Z? And then bringing up some ideas that they may enjoy and like, and possibly want to hire you because of that, to create some positive change. But that, you brought up a really good point, Tony. Definitely research.
I would branch off what Ant said as well. Value is huge. I think I just had this conversation with a mentee of mine, is especially as a new grad, sometimes I think you're afraid to, I don't want to say brag on yourself, but put value into the experiences that you have, right? Because you feel like you only have a little bit of experience. But I don't think you should go into an interview saying like, I want to work here so I can continue to learn, because that essentially is not what the employer wants, right? The employer is there so that you can sell yourself and show them like what they're going to get or to benefit from getting you. And I think even if it is something as simple as your personality traits, right? If it's your work ethic, if it's your diversity, you're going to help diversify their team. I mean, sell yourself and tell the employer what it is that they're going to get from hiring you, right? Like they need some type of value from the person that they're hiring. So do not be afraid to put value on the experiences that you have, even if you only have a little bit of experience. Learn how to sell that in a way that the employer is going to benefit from whatever you have to offer.
Can I shift the conversation with, in terms of applying with resumes and CVs? Because I just had to do my first CV for the first time and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But with resumes, as for those of us who have interviewed others, what can we tell our new grads, like, this is really important to highlight in your resume, or the verbiage and what they should have when applying for a job?
I think, you know, it's really important with the resumes to learn how to truly highlight the things that the logistics of what you operate in, the authority that you have, and the skills that you are proficient in. You know, your cover letter, you can elaborate a little bit more, but it's really important to try to highlight those areas. You know, and it's really important to learn how to use power words. I think that's the term that's still kind of utilized in regards to writing resumes. But when it comes to resumes too, is make sure you understand how to use power words. Make sure you learn how to highlight your skill sets and proficiencies. But make sure you're putting yourself in a position as a student or as an employer that you're showing that you're doing those things. I like, for example, a weak thing is, you know, I've assisted, or, you know, I've observed. No, if you've actually practiced the skills, if you've actually become proficient, then you need to learn how to articulate in your resume that you're actually doing those things and that you're skillful in those things. So those are the things that I would, you know, try to, you know, really push, you know, when you're writing your resumes.
I would add on to that for your resume, make sure you know your audience. You could be submitting it to HR or a hiring manager or somebody at a large hospital or whatever that has nothing to do with the clinical side, you know, the practicing side of sports medicine and athletic training. Or you could be submitting it to a practicing athletic trainer who happens to be a manager. You know, definitely find a way to highlight your skills and the things you've accomplished and the things you become confident in, but make sure that you know who's going to read your resume. If you get very specific and technical and you get a hiring manager who has just worked in HR their entire lives, they're not going to understand the gravity of those accomplishments, and you might get passed up. So as hard as it can be, sometimes you got to try to figure out who your audience is.
And if y'all don't mind, just to touch base on that, for me, obviously I'm in a teaching role now. So, and I had never taught before prior to where I was at. So I had to actually, like you said, cater to my audience. So I had to pull from my experience what would be, you know, more appealing to a principal, you know, to other teachers. So I had to speak a little bit more on my ability to teach CPR and, you know, the in-services that I've taught over the years, the plyometric in-services, the, you know, rehab in-services that I've done. So I actually steered away from just trying to articulate how clinically strong I was and started adding to my resumes all the areas where I've taught other people under me, or, you know, people who worked with me. So I do agree with you on that.
Would just echo that. Obviously, the words are important. So I always use Bloom's taxonomy as like a reference for strong words, I guess, or verbs that you can use on your resume. For me, as a new grad, I do not want to see somebody put on their resume, like, I applied electrical stimulation to patients. Like, every athletic training student coming out of every program has taped an ankle and put stim on and all of those things, right? So that is not going to be the reason why I'm hiring you. Obviously, I want to make sure you're proficient in that, but I think it comes down to, I read a really good one from somebody the other day, is those things like patient-centered care, right? That's kind of like a hot term in our profession right now. And I think any athletic training student, any athletic trainer at this point has provided some type of patient-centered care, right? So I think that is a word that I would rather see, other than just provided treatments and rehabilitations to athletes, right? We're putting things like, I provided culturally competent care, or I provided patient-centered care, or I used patient-rated outcome measures to evaluate my patients. Like, those are things that athletic trainers do so many things on a daily basis, but you have to think outside of the box in terms of kind of impressing an employer, right? I'm not fluffing it because these are all things that I did, but I'm not breaking it down to those individual skills. I think so many people, especially at the entry level, feel like that's the only thing that they have to offer is that they are competent in doing modalities or manual therapy. But like, how can you express that in a way that makes it more important, right? If I do manual therapy, everybody does manual therapy, but how can I say like, I customized or individualize my treatments for patients based on minimal equipment? That's the same thing, right? But we have to be able to word it in a way that's a little bit more critical and higher level, opposed to just saying I applied joint mobilizations to a basketball player. So kind of thinking about those verbs and then thinking about those more critical research areas or areas within our profession where we're trying to go, and how can you kind of show that you're on your way to doing that is what I like to see.
That's a great point, Nikki. Like, I think even as a student, in whatever year you are, like as a new grad, I try to put a lot of my leadership skills that I did when I did a physical therapy clinic rotation, and I was the senior athletic training student there. They had me train all of the new incoming athletic training students, and that's something that you can put on your resume to show that, you know, you have these specific skills to that. Like those kinds of things, thinking outside of the box, like you said, and not just putting like I applied electrical stimulation X, Y, and Z. Like we know that that's covers athletic training duties. I think we know that. But looking at those outside skills, what kind of soft skills did you do? Patient interaction? Did you like those kinds of things that will make you seem more appealing to the employer?
I think it's little things. Like, for example, in my class, they do a podcast. I think I reached out to you guys about like how to go about it. But for me, like that's something that I feel my students can put on the resume, as in like engaged in social media marketing or anything like that, right? It's a softer skill. And I think that's what employers really want right now, especially in new grads, is knowing the fact that you have soft skills and you can communicate with people and patients. So find unique, like maybe projects that you've done in school or mentorship programs or things that you did within school that are different or softer or have different type of value, opposed to just being competent in the areas that you should be competent in by graduation.
To go off that idea of soft skills, that's especially important to consider. I think, you know, we all have a basic level of competency. When you get to any job, if they want you to do something specific or if they want you to do it a specific way, they can teach you that specific way of doing things. What makes you unique is the soft skills that you bring. You know, so if your thing is culturally competent care, you know, that is not something that they can teach you while you're there already. That's something you bring, and those are the things you can highlight.
And in my opinion, that's where a lot of that comes back to the research. You have to understand what that organization or that institution is looking for so that you can mold, because a lot of the resumes are going to be pretty much the same. We're all learning the same stuff. But I'm not in a hiring position, so I don't have too much experience. But if I was, I want to see the cover letter. I want to see the personality pop. I want to see if they're a good fit with me, because you have to have good working relationships if you're more than one athletic trainer.
No, I agree. I mean, reality is reality is when it comes to the interview process, your skill, if your resume is written right, that's what got you there. You know, your interview and your resume and your cover letter. But when it does come down to the interview, regardless of you believe it or not, we are trying to figure out who you are as a person, and do you fit on my staff? Do you fit on my team? I understand you have the skills, but do you have the character that I'm looking for as well? You know, do you have the passion that's going to continue to drive you to meet the vision that I have for this program as well? You know, do you, personality wise, you know, is there any concerns that is going to be too much of a clash? I understand that, you know, we don't need to have the same personality, but is there going to be too much of an issue where we're going to clash so much that we can't come together and work efficiently as a team? You know, so understand that the employers are looking at that too. And you need to be looking at that as well as an interviewee.
I think one of the easiest ways to as an interviewee to see what the company culture is and to see if you're going to fit with that personality or if your personalities are going to clash is, today, look at their social media. You can obviously, hopefully find their mission and vision statements on their website, but you can find a lot more things that they don't outright say in the way they engage on social media. It's a huge part of the hiring process today, whether we like it or not. The pages that they follow, the people they interact with. If this organization, or say this school, just posts records and says, hey, we beat this team, or hey, we won this game, or hey, this is our record this year, numbers, win, 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 then that might be how they approach the environment, the culture, at that job, at that school. We're just focused on winning. That's all we want to talk about is winning. You have to, recognize if you want to be part of a culture like that. Whereas if they say they use their social media to say, hey, one of our student athletes did this really cool thing, somebody's working on their Eagle project, so they're doing a service project or something, and we're going to highlight that. Or, hey, this is a booster family that does this. That demonstrates a little bit different culture, to tell you what the school or the company kind of values is what they highlight, how they engage with people on social media. So you can learn a little bit about that, even if it's not a specifically stated mission statement. They're still making a statement there.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I'm thinking again back to the new grad thing. And I think there's a lot of things that new grads don't ask because they're in the new grad stage, so they don't really think about the long term. So I think part of your questions for the company need to be benefits and things of that nature, right? So obviously salary for new grads is a huge thing, making sure you're putting yourself in an appropriate salary range. But I think there needs to be questions about potential benefits, right? Whether it's retirement, whether it's maternity or vacation leave. And that goes back to the culture, right? If you take a day off, are there people there to cover for you? Is it a healthy environment where you're allowed to take a day off? Or are you going to feel like you're never allowed to do so? Like, well, what's contributing to the work-life balance there? Do they have tuition reimbursement if you choose to go back to school? Are they going to be supportive of that? If you get an advanced degree, will there be a stipend or any of those sorts? I think it's very important to look at the benefits package, even if that's something you're not interested in at the moment, you're just worried about securing your first job. I think it's very important if you plan to be with an organization for at least a few years that you're looking at what are the benefits aside from just the salary that are available to you. Whether when you just ask or whether they can kind of be convinced or coerced to give you, maybe the salary isn't as good as you would like it to be. So what kind of other benefits are there? Is there a cell phone allowance? Is there professional development money? Are they going to pay for your licensure or your state certification or your CEUs? I think those are very important questions to set a precedent at the interview, rather than ask later once you're already hopefully hired.
And what I would add to that is, for you young professionals, whether you have a mentor or you reach out to your state, okay, or your regional or even your national organization to figure out what your value is, even when it comes to salaries. So, find somebody who's willing to look at your resume and see what you've done, your experience and so forth, to help you identify what your value is in the states that you're about to apply to. Because again, you don't want to go into an interview fighting, but you want to at least know what you're worth. Now, you should already know for most jobs that you apply to how much the salary is. Okay, but if you can identify what you're worth, then that can obviously direct, what jobs you're going to apply to in the first place. And then when you get to that interview process, if they do lowball you just a little bit, you can kind of decide if this is a moment for you to negotiate to bump it back up to what you're worth and be obviously reasonable. So I strongly advise, whether you have a mentor or you reach out to your state, regional, or even national organization, to make sure you know on a personal level, off your experience, your education, expertise, what your value is when it comes to your salary.
That's a great point, Tony. As in California, they just, the CATA put out a recommended salary or per hour rate. And you have to think of your cost of living. you have to think of, you know, everything else that you're going to need to pay for. You know, let's be real. You got to pay for all of these bills. You got to pay for gas to get to work. You got to feed yourself, like, you know, and all of these extra things, they have to be considered in your negotiating for your salary. Pull up the labor statistics in your county, in your city, in your state. You know, reach out to, like you said, to your state association and see if your state has put out a recommended hourly rate, or if there's a national one. There are lots of things that you can search for that can help you negotiate if they do lowball you. And then, you know, if they're not pushing, or they're not, you know, then what Nikki said, how else are you going to compensate me? Am I going to have to pay for my own dues? Am I going to have to pay for my own Con Ed? Or are you going to be able to supply that? Because that's also very expensive. So thinking about, you know, your everyday cost, are you going to have to purchase your own uniforms for work? That kind of stuff. Those kinds of things are very important to think about as well when you're negotiating your salary or your hourly rate.
I think one of the things I wish I would have known in a negotiation for salary at one point, I was offered a job and a specific salary, and I knew I could ask for a little more. I felt like I was worth a little more. I kind of wish I had bumped it up even more than I thought I was worth, because in the process of negotiation, and you know, I'll admit I'm not very good at negotiating, but in that process, you ask for just a little bit more than what you think you want, and then you're willing to, you know, come down from there to hopefully land at what you actually want. So it may sound a little, you know, outrageous. It might sound a little scary to say, hey, I want a lot. I want this much. I want this number. But just know that, you know, it's a process that may go back and forth a couple times, and you may come down, but hopefully if you shoot high, you come down to where you really want to be.
That's a great point, especially like with contracted work. California, I believe the recommended rate is 43 an hour. So when you tell that to somebody, they're like, are you kidding me for an AT? And so, you know, instead of saying, okay, 30 an hour, and then they'll lowball you to 25 or 22, like, no, you're exactly right. Start with that highest rate. And then they'll be like, okay, well then what about 30 instead of offering you 20 an hour? So I think that's a very, very good point.
In fact, if the going rate is...
No. So, sorry, go for it. I was saying all they can say is no. So ask for the higher rate. At that point, if you're arguing about salary, you've already gotten the job, right? So they're not going to take the job away from you. So go as high as you can go, and all they can say is no until you get down to a point where, you know, they feel comfortable. Usually they have that point in their mind already. So that's not going to change. They're going in knowing what their maximum rate that they can pay you is. So fight until you figure out what that maximum is.
If the going rate there is 43, I might even ask for 50. You know, so you can come back down to that 43.
And just to emphasize one thing that Nikki just said, a lot of times when they offer you the job, when they offer you the salary, you are the person that they're looking for. So if there is an opportunity to negotiate, understand they want you. So at that moment, do not feel, you know, discouraged not to push, because this is a good moment right now. They've looked at the South, they've looked at your resume, they've done a cover letter, they interviewed you and several other people, and they decided that you are the candidate. And they know what their range is, like they said. But right now we're going to offer this. But at the same time, it's okay to negotiate a little bit more. They're willing to work with you. If you are truly who they want, they're going to work with you. But at the end of the day, if they can only offer so much, say, hey, you for example, they start off with 40, you push for 50, hey, we can do 46. Now it's for you to decide. Do you want to continue to make this an issue, or are you going to accept the 46? But they're willing to work with you, and y'all got to be comfortable with that.
That goes back to what Nikki said. If you're starting at that 46, is there room for promotion, and how would you be promotion, and how much would that pay raise be? Because if you are able to get a raise every year, then starting at 46 isn't so bad if you get more and more money every year. Like looking at those kind of benefits and how you can progress where you will potentially spend a few years.
I think to be specific with examples too, just because I think this is difficult, right? We can give tips to new grads, but when you're actually doing it in the process, it's difficult, right? So for example, if I'm in the high school setting, I got a stipend for having a student athletic training club, right? That was something that added to my salary. I think it was $1,000 maybe that they added to my salary for being able to facilitate that, right? If you teach a class, for example, I'm in the collegiate setting, if I'm an adjunct for the athletic training program, then that's $3,000 a semester that adds to my salary. So find out where those extra incentives are. Do you have a contract with your hospital, which gives you first access to per diem work? What is that going to be? Can you be an assistant athletic director on top of that? Like, where do those extra monies come from and what opportunities are there? Obviously, they're more work. So I think that's important to keep in mind for a new grad, that usually when you take on more tasks, it is more work, but you also get compensation for that. So you kind of have to figure out how much you want to work, but what are the other avenues that can allow me to add on to my salary or add on to the benefits possible, right? If they pay for tuition, maybe you get an additional degree for free. That's more work, but it also allows you cost savings or benefits on the other end. So just thinking of some realistic examples of how to improve that salary, I think is important.
I'm going to age myself a little bit. When I came out in May 2018 with my master's, I had the student loans. I needed somewhere to live, and you got all kinds of bills. So I don't even, if someone's offering you money, in my opinion, take the money. And then once you have that first job, that's when you really find out, all right, where do I want to take this now? Is there room for growth here? If not, let's go look at other jobs. Because it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to find that job you really want when you're paying your bills already.
That's a good point. Coming out of school, I thought coming out of school I would be in the collegiate setting. When I graduated, I ended up at a PT clinic that I really loved during one of my clinical rotations. And I looked at it as the same way. I need to start paying my bills. I need to start paying my student loans. For what I needed, I was still living at home. So like the cost of everything, I thought the salary I had for the duties that I was doing at that job was great. And then, realizing, where can I go from here? How can this job benefit me to move on to the next stepping stone? Like, your first job is not going to always be it. You're not going to find like, this is it. I love it. I'm going to stay here. I, just like Tony, didn't think I would end up being a secondary school teacher or a secondary school athletic trainer. And now I love it and don't ever plan on leaving until I want to retire in higher ed. That's just, it's your plan will come, and that first job may not always be the one that you want to end up at, and that's okay. It's like Tom said, we understand that we have a lot of bills to pay out of school. So finding that correct job for you at that moment in time in your life and what's going on with you personally. And that's okay if you end up taking the money. Just always realize there's something better out there for you, and you can always make it better as well.
Just to echo off your end point, I totally agree, but I think we know that for new grads or entry levels coming into the profession, that attrition and burnout is a thing. So take the job for the money if you need to, but do not get trapped, for lack of a better word, in that job, because we know that if you take a job that you weren't necessarily happy with, just because you needed the money, don't get trapped there, because that is how we lose great people out of the athletic training profession, is taking these jobs that we know don't pay enough to help us fulfill all the bills that we need, or don't put us in a position to fulfill our mission or our vision or our goals for our career. And then we kind of end up hating the athletic training profession and digging out of it. So I would say, obviously, money is important when you're coming out. I know I have a ton of student loans, so take it when you need it, but also be working on what's your next plan to get out of that position at the same time. So just don't get trapped in a situation that you have to take financially.
And just
Sorry, Tony, like, you build these relationships in your workplace. And I know, like, it was really difficult for me to leave my physical therapy clinic because of all the relationships I built over the years. And a lot of people feel guilty leaving their job for something better. And at the end of the day, we have to advocate for ourselves. Like Nikki said, burnout, it's real. Your mental health is more important. You are more important, because at the end of the day, if anything does happen to you, your job will be posted the next day. So you have to realize that and realize that you come first.
Yep. No, all I was just wanting to touch base on was just another key point in regards to networking. You know, I know NATA got shut down this year due to COVID, but for young professionals, if you can get to your state conference, if you can get to your regional conference, if you can get to your national conference, and go with your mentors, that's what I would recommend. Don't just go by yourself. Be the third wheel. This is a good time to be the third wheel. Go with your mentors. Be introduced to people. If you're looking to work at the college setting, start introducing, start exchanging contact information. Send the email out just, you know, of interest and just follow-ups. But build your network. If you're trying to work collegiate, you need to be going to these regional and national conferences and actually communicating with these people who already work in the collegiate setting. Okay, actually get to know them, follow up with them, look forward to meeting them again at the next conference, the next convention, the next seminar. Find ways to get in front of them as much as you can. So when that time comes, they actually know who you are. They know who your mentor is. They know who you are. They've had the opportunity to get to know you. They hear your passion. They've learned of your character. And when it comes to it, you're at the top of their list, you know? So I strongly, strongly recommend, if you can afford it, you know, try to find a way to get to these conferences, try to find a way to be able to network. Obviously, social media is helping as well. I just saw last night, there was somebody who reached out to an athletic trainer who I think we all value pretty well. And he just asked, hey, can you be my mentor, sorry. And the person was like, yes, no problem. And that was through social media. And I'm sure if that is done right and they continue to move forward down that journey, that's going to set that person up for probably a pretty successful job later on, if not just being a better athletic trainer, period.
I think of a great point, Tony. I only went to one conference as an athletic training student. And I didn't have a lot of guidance in terms of networking and being involved in or trying to be involved with an ATA or my state association or anything like that. So the only time those things were brought up was when our senior year, and then we had to do research and then go present at a conference. So I think that is a really good point. If you can afford it, go to the conferences as a student. Meet people, meet other students from other places, because eventually they'll have other jobs in other places that they can potentially help you out with. So I think that is a very crucial point, and something that I wish I did more as an undergraduate student, was attending more conferences as a student.
Typically, student registration is cheaper.
I keep cutting you off. Go, Andrea.
No, I apologize. I'm just saying, typically that is the cheapest time to go to a conference is when you're a student, because the registration fees are less. That's all.
I would just say, it's funny we say, can you afford it? Because most of the time you can't. When you're broke, you're a student. And then when you're you just graduated, it's even worse. But I'm a big proponent, speaking from somebody who has a ridiculous amount of student loans, of spending the money though. I think if that's where you truly want to be, you have to put yourself in the position to meet people that are in that place. So if you have to eat ramen noodles for an extra week because you spent your grocery money to go to ATAF or your local conference, I think that is something that is worth doing it. And I agree, like as a student, I didn't know that, but I think I valued that as I got out into the profession. So like, work the extra events, go to the conferences, go to the places where the people that you need to meet are at, whether it's on social media, whether it's in person. Spend the money. It will come back to you like on the back end. Maybe not at that moment and it'll seem miserable, but it's worth the $200 or $300 to take the class that's taught by the person that you want to meet, or to go to the setting, because people remember you. That's how I got involved, is that somebody remembered me from going to a conference that I didn't necessarily need to be at, right? It wasn't like directly applicable to me at that time. I was in the high school setting. I didn't need to go to a college hockey conference, but if it had who I needed to meet there at it, then I invested that money, and I think it pays off in the long run.
And again, I emphasize, if possible, go with a mentor or go link up with somebody within the circle of network that you're trying to get into, if you can. Because you again, even though you may be at that conference, especially NATA conference, thousands of people there, and it's not always the most comfortable setting to just go navigate through and say hi to anybody. So, but if you have a mentor, if you have somebody that's in that circle that you know, link up with them, go to one of those dinners, go to a social gathering, get yourself introduced, at least get the ball rolling. And then from there, you can hopefully take the initiative to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I was so scared to go to those things. Even like starting the conferences as a certified, like, I was like, who the heck do I know? How am I going to start a conversation as a young professional? Like, I just felt so awkward going to those dinners, but I put myself in those situations. And sometimes we have to. And if you don't have anyone to go with you, you will most likely end up meeting someone who can create some kind of connection in the networking that comes from those socials, those dinners, those happy hours. They end up benefiting you, even though you may be like me and find it a little awkward and trying to, who can I approach that and then all those things that we feel as new grads, with the awkwardness of just trying to get our foot in the door.
And you can definitely pick and choose which one of these you want to go to. You don't have to put down $1,000 and go to every single thing. If your goal is to find a job within your state, then go to your state conference. If your goal is to, move across the country, then go to an ATA. Find something that is going to fit what you want. If you want to stay within your region, go to your district conference or whatever. But you don't have to hit all of them. Just to say it doesn't have to be super expensive. Just pick one and really dedicate yourself to it. Get involved in that one.
Great point. Tom, what else you got for us?
I don't know. We just talked for like an hour, and now we're talking about networking, build relationships, and going to conferences when we start out on the interview process and what we're looking for.
Mine has derailed a little bit.
I think that's great organic stuff.
It's all going to help you get a job, hopefully.
Yeah, this networking can get you to the interview, and I think that's the value of bringing that point up. It can get you there, and that's because sometimes that's hard too. It's getting to the interview, but biggest things is having a solid resume. Not too loud, but you want it to be able to pop. You want it to be professional. So getting a good resume is huge. Learning how to write a good cover letter is huge, because I'm sure anybody who's been on hiring committees, some people could be really good ATs, but they don't have a good cover letter, good resume, and you got to look through 100. That gets passed by very quickly. So it is important that you get a hold of somebody to review your resume and your cover letter to make sure it pops. It's important.
One thing I forgot to say about the resumes is if I was a waitress and if you had other jobs that show your skills, put that on your resume. It doesn't matter if it's an athletic training job or a teaching job. As a waitress, I had to do so many things: customer service skills, time management, all these things that translate to not only an athletic trainer, but as a teacher. And so, if you haven't had an athletic training job but you have, you work at Starbucks or you do retail, working in retail is huge for our line of business, dealing with parents and especially in the secondary school setting in difficult situations. Put those kinds of jobs on there because it shows your other skills that are going to be necessary for specific situations as a healthcare professional.
And you can absolutely use your cover letter to explain those skills that you list on your resume.
Yes.
Try and like I'm sure Tony was alluding to, keep it brief, keep your resume short and impactful, but your cover letter is where you can really kind of expand on hey, all I have is all I've worked at is Starbucks so far, but this is what I've done there that will translate to this position. So that's where you can get a little more wordy and a little more like, explain why are you talking about your Starbucks job so much? Well, this is why it's going to help me in this position.
My last thing, I guess, to take it back to the interview would be specific. So this is one of my biggest things, like use people's names. If you're in an interview with somebody, refer to them by name. Be like, okay, Mike, you made a good point. To answer your question, like remember their names of each person that's in the interview and refer to them by name. If you're following up in a thank you, specifically say something that you guys talked about in the interview. Like, don't just say, thank you, it was great to meet you. Say like, thank you, I really enjoyed the conversation we had about whatever, valuing patient-centered care, right? Like leave them with something that is tangible. Like, I hate to say it, but feed off of people's egos to some extent, right? If you know the person that is interviewing you won the GATA Athletic Trainer of the Year last year, bring that up, right? Be like, oh, well, I'm trying to learn more information about how you did X, Y, and Z. I think it's people feel that, right? If they feel like you know something about them, that you did your research about them, that you remembered their name, or that you remembered they had 3 children and that they have a really good work-life balance, like be specific and make tangible relationships with those people over things. Use their name. I can't emphasize that enough. Like use somebody's name when you're speaking to them, or the things that they told you about them. In your follow-up and in your thank you, be specific about what you talked about maybe something that they mentioned to you about themselves. Maybe it's their music collection or their favorite Disney character, whatever it may be, something that makes you stand out that way. So be specific during the interview process, and then also in your follow-up, I think goes a long way.
And that goes back to the research as well. Like, especially at the college setting, a lot of times you'll see the vision statement, you see the mission statement, but a lot of these athletic trainers have their profiles. So in regards to being specific about the individual, you should be able to read up on each athletic trainer that's on that staff and start picking apart, things that pop out to you to bring up in an interview that you're passionate about as well. But that's doing your research, and that's really important. 2 points that I would kind of elaborate on. For me, I advise to actually prepare an interview template, especially for your phone interviews. And what I mean by that is there are going to be some questions that you'll learn that are very similar as you go to each place. For example, strengths and weaknesses. You may get a question that involves whether it's your personal strengths and weaknesses or your clinical strengths and weaknesses. If you know that that's a common question that's come up, you should already generate a template. And by that, you can sit down and actually thoroughly articulate your thoughts so that you're detailed but concise. Okay, so especially on a phone interview, if that question comes up, they can't see you anyway. You can sit there, take a moment, pause, and hit it hard. And I think that's important. I actually bring my template on with me on my face-to-face interviews. Now, I don't have it sitting out in front of me, but I let them know I'm a rambler at times. So I have that template there to help give me guidance. And I've always, for me, I've always been told that I've had a strong interview experience as an interviewee. But it's because of the fact that I've been able to do a good job of articulating how my experience has helped me grow as an athletic trainer, helped me develop my expertise and knowledge within the profession. And that's the last thing I want to touch base on for me is learning how after you develop that resume, and you can do it through your cover letter, but when you get on an interview, learn how to articulate when they're asking questions, how to take what you've put on your resume and show them how that will benefit them while you're there. So for example, if they're asking you about your clinical strengths, well, don't just tell them that, I'm good at rehab. Well, how about you elaborate? Well, when I was at Ball State University, I had the opportunity to work under my mentor. I did about 5 ACL cases. This is what we learned. These are the mistakes that I made, but this is my growth, whatever the case may be, but articulate. If you're good at rehab, if you're good at manual therapy, well, what did you learn? Where did you gain that experience? Did you gain it at this school? Did you gain it at that job? where did you gain that experience for you to sit here and tell me that manual therapy is your strength?
But I think also what made you good at it? Like when you say that, where did you learn it? But like, why are you good? You got superior patient outcomes, your patients liked you better, they were more
Yep.
satisfied. Like, what does that do for the organization? Like, what does
Agree.
your strength in manual therapy do for them? It's
Yep.
really how it has to be worded.
And
That goes back to your point of selling yourself, Nikki, right? You have to sell yourself. Always,
Mhm.
always, every point you hit, everything you say, you have to sell yourself. That's probably, it's a business transaction, right? So think of it that way and make sure that at the end of the day that you are satisfied with that business transaction.
don't try not to burn those bridges, because there's only so many athletic trainers. We all know each other. You know, if someone applies from Georgia and I see Ball State on there where Tony went to school, and I go, "Hey Tony, do you know this person?" And they're like, "Stay away from them." Well, then we're not gonna get any further in the interview process, because that's over. Next person.
That's
And everybody knows everybody.
That is huge. That's a great point, Tom. And I think that goes back to it's a good and bad. Make sure everyone knows you, right? Do that networking, but definitely don't burn those bridges because it can come back and bite you.
Make sure everyone knows you for the right reasons.
Meanwhile, Alex is looking back at all them burned bridges.
I only honestly, it was just one tough situation right out of school, and that situation happened because as a new grad, I did not know the position I was put in. I put myself in that position because I thought this person was trying to help me. I was very naive. I was very young, and I was gaslit a lot. And here I was thinking like, oh my God, like they're going to help me. Like, you know, it was that type of situation where I thought they were really trying to get me somewhere, but they were just using me. And unfortunately that made me burn a bridge. But over the years, I repaired that bridge, and I'm very thankful with the relationship that I recovered, because I realized that as I got older and a more seasoned AT, that I was put in that crappy situation because I was taken advantage of as a new grad. So, I mean, those things may happen and happened to me, but I was able to repair that relationship. And that was just only one bridge, and I haven't burned any bridges ever since. So, I mean, and it may happen, you know, you're put in those situations as a new grad, especially if you just accept a job right away, not knowing what you get put into, which is what I did because I knew the money. And as a new grad, I was saying yes, yes, yes to everything because I felt like it was they're helping me. I'm gonna get places, and you learn the hard way, but you take those lessons and you learn from them. And it just makes you that much better, not only as an athletic trainer, but as a person, because then you learn how to read people, and how to protect yourself a little better. Thanks for bringing back horrible memories, Tom.
All right. And on that note, thank you, everyone, for spending your Sunday either morning, West Coasters, or afternoon, the rest of us, here. I appreciate it. And I look forward to the next topic next week, hopefully.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for hosting.